This knife has a straight edge on it, so it's very easy. And maybe in our world here, there lives a happy little mountain.
Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of university and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Today's case that we're going to be discussing is something called the REINERT murders, if I've pronounced that correctly. So the REINERT murders are a name given to a set of murders, or at least one confirmed murder and two believed or potential murders involving a family known as the REINERT family. Susan REINERT was found murdered and her two children, Karen, who was 11, and Michael, who was 10, were missing, and no one knows to this day where they are. So if you want to hear a little bit about the case, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. From now on, I'm going to give a quick disclaimer at the start of my videos. There will always be a disclaimer in the description, so if at any point you feel offended or you think I've gotten something incorrect, then definitely check out the disclaimer in the description of all of my videos. But as always, I am by no means here to offend anyone, do anyone any injustice. If I get anything wrong, I apologise and feel free to correct me. All I'm working on is the knowledge that I could access myself from sources on the internet, so obviously I try my best and I don't mean to get anything wrong. Obviously all of this is supposed to raise awareness and to ideally bring justice to the families of those who unfortunately are victims in these cases. Susan REINERT was the divorced mother of two children, Karen and Michael. Like I said, Karen was 11 years old at the time of her disappearance and Michael was 10, and the three lived together in a family home in a place called Ardmore in Pennsylvania. So Susan worked full-time as a teacher because of being a single mother, so she was there to support her two children. Like I said, she worked at the local Upper Merion High School, and according to a number of sources online, the main reason for her divorce was the fact that she was actually having an affair with a colleague of hers in the school. So she was having an affair with another teacher. After her divorce was finalised, she began a relationship with this man named William Bradfield, and he's kind of an important name in this case. And it appeared to all of those concerned, to all of their loved ones, as though they were in a very, very long-term secure relationship. And because of just how secure their relationship had seemed to, like I said, all of their loved ones, everyone that knew them, it didn't strike anyone as anything strange when just a couple months before her disappearance, Susan announced that she was actually going to be changing a number of her kind of like life insurance policies, and she would basically be naming William as her sole beneficiary or as a main beneficiary in a lot of her wealth. In a particular sense, he was listed as the sole and one and only beneficiary for her life insurance policy payout. So if anything had happened to her, the actual payout would go straight to him as opposed to the children, because it was within the idea that he would obviously look after the two children. They were way too young to be there to receive the payout, as well as naming him as the main heir to her estate under similar sort of circumstances. And around the same time, she'd actually given him a large amount of money, like a lot of money, and she told him that she wanted him to invest it. So I'll go into a little bit more details about that later on in the case when it kind of pipes up in the investigation. But just have this in mind, this wasn't strange at all at the time, and this happened a couple months before she disappeared, but she'd given him a lot of money as well as listing him as basically one of the only heirs in her fortune. But then all of this changes on June 22nd, 1979, when Susan and her two children, Karen and Michael, disappeared. A witness who was in the same neighbourhood as where the REINERT family were living at the time had reported seeing Susan leave her house on this day that the three mysteriously disappeared, and she seemed frantic, like she was hurrying the two children into their car with kind of a few things, nothing like no suitcases or anything to suggest they were going on holiday, but she just recalled them being ushered into the car in quite a frantic manner. So pretty much the last sighting of them from this local person who knew them was them getting into Susan's car, which by the way was an orange Plymouth Horizon hatchback. So that is also another key point in the investigation. From here they just drove off, so this witness didn't see where they went, they just said they headed out of the neighbourhood and that was it. And as much as they had seemed hurried, this obviously wouldn't have necessarily seemed super strange to the witness. It wouldn't have gone to worst case scenario in their head. It isn't an unusual sight to see a mother with 2 children trying to hurry them into a car. It's not that strange until after the witness had heard of their disappearance that they realised that this could be something quite important. And then 3 days later, on June 25th, 1979, local law enforcement received word of a car that had been found abandoned that matches Susan's car's description. And upon discovering this car, upon searching it, they find Susan REINERT's body in the trunk. The body had not only been found undressed, but they were able to conclude that before her death she had actually been bound and beaten with a chain before her cause of death, which was actually an injection of morphine that ultimately led to her overdosing. Investigators were later able to determine through examining her body that this lethal injection had actually been administered around 24 to 36 hours after the initial beating. So after she had suffered all those injuries from what they believed was a chain and been bound and all these awful things, they had happened while she was still alive and over a day before she was actually killed. And despite them finding Susan's car and her remains, there was still no sign of Karen or Michael whatsoever. So police investigators' first sort of focus, as you can imagine, I'm sure your minds kind of went to this as well, it was to focus on Susan's boyfriend, William Bradfield, because he just seems like the most likely subject. So before they even found all of this information about him being the sole beneficiary in her will, he still is obviously going to be a main suspect because he wasn't initially part of the family and he was the only one that seemed to be fine. Nothing happened to him, so they checked him out first. And obviously this was when they discovered all of the information about the fortune, and this is when they realised that he clearly had quite a lot to gain from Susan's death, probably the person with the most to gain from Susan's death. It was also discovered that William Bradfield was not at all faithful to Susan whatsoever. He was seeing at least 3 other women that they knew of. They never really got anything conclusive, but they know that he wasn't as faithful as she had maybe imagined or liked to have believed or been led to have believed by him. So all of this information combined, it started to seem as though William Bradfield was a little bit of a shady character. He perhaps was quite cunning and had some sort of secret agenda in relation to her fortune. And investigators had also recalled the fact that when he was asked about the other women that he was seeing, he was adamant that none of them knew about each other. So he was sure that Susan didn't know about the other women and that the other women didn't know about Susan, which is an interesting thought because a couple of theories could obviously come up as potentially some of these being linked. In the year 1981, because of all of this investigation into the money that he was left as a result of Susan's death, William Bradfield was actually convicted of misappropriating Susan's money as a result of investigators finding all of this out. So in particular, the fact that he had been given a total of $25,000 with the instruction of investing it. So she had wanted to invest it into a 6-month certificate at a 12% interest rate because she didn't know how to do it, but she knew that she wanted to set up this future and security for her children with this money that she had. So she entrusted William with this job because she believed that obviously he was a little bit more knowledgeable on it. So he actually kept it basically, didn't invest it, and this is why he was able to be convicted of misappropriating her money. And as a result of this conviction, he was given a 2-year prison sentence because of the fact that she had been murdered before any of this could come to light. So he not only was able to claim her life insurance policy payout, but also this extra 25 grand that she had given him with these intentions. And then in 1983, not long after being released from prison, he was once again arrested based on the learning of new evidence that pointed towards him potentially having some reason or him involvement in plotting these murders of Susan, Michael and Karen in the hopes of receiving her life insurance payout. So obviously, like I said, it was a likely scenario, but they hadn't had any evidence to guarantee this at this point. But there had apparently been some new piece of information that had come forward that had made this case a little bit stronger, hence why he was once again being arrested. So prosecutors in the trial had actually argued that the main likely reason that they wanted to portray in the trial of him being guilty is because he had kept this money that Susan had intended on investing, that she'd asked him to invest for her, and he had then kept it and murdered her basically to prevent her from finding out that he had kept it and not invested it. So, and then kind of getting the life insurance policy payout was an extra added bonus on top of that. Essentially, it just appeared there was a lot of information, a lot of theories running around, but it just looked like he did have the most to gain, which he obviously did, and he was also possibly the most able to murder them, because no one would have necessarily thought it'd been strange if he had driven the 4 of them away, or yeah, so it just looked like he was very, very guilty. So as a result, he was actually convicted of 3 life sentences because he was found guilty of conspiring to murder the 3 individuals, the 3 victims in the REINERT family. However, it was at this point that investigators had began gaining a suspicion, I guess, that he had not actually been acting alone, and their focus shifted to another man. His name was Dr. J. Charles Smith, who was actually the principal at the high school where not only Susan worked, but obviously William Bradfield worked. So investigators actually started believing, or they started theorising, I guess, that it wasn't actually Bradfield who carried out the murders, but it was Dr. J. Charles Smith, who had been the one who actually murdered Susan and potentially murdered the 2 children, but it was actually William who had been planning it all, putting it all together, basically organising the entire thing. And in defence of Smith, when all of this started coming to light, his lawyers started to argue that this was actually a ploy that William Bradfield had been kind of playing the authorities. He wanted them to shift their focus and make Dr. J. Charles Smith, to appear more guilty, just to shift the blame off of him to maybe get a lesser sentence or something. So that was kind of their main argument, not saying that he didn't do it, like not providing any reasons for why he didn't do it, but just saying that he just didn't do it because he's obviously lying. Despite this, Smith was actually found guilty of murder. He was charged in 1985 with 3 counts of murder, and ultimately he was sentenced to death. An interesting fact is that by the time this conviction actually came about, Dr. J. Charles Smith was actually serving another prison sentence. It was an unrelated prison sentence and to do with a number of things. Been charged on petty things, I guess. It was like drug possession, deliverance. I think there was intent to ship stolen goods or something. It was a mixture of things. Basically, he was just a bit of a dodgy man. So when he received this sentence in relation to the REINERT murders, he was already in prison, but he had been a free man at the time of the murder taking place. In 1998, William Bradfield actually died in prison. He never confessed to Susan's murder, nor did he say anything to do with what happened to Karen and Michael, if he had any knowledge of it. Nothing ever came about, and he died without giving any answers whatsoever. In 1989, Smith's convictions were actually overturned when there was a piece of evidence that came to light saying that basically the way that they had managed to convict him, so the evidence that they had used to convict him, was obtained unethically, and ultimately they had to throw out all of the charges. And so as a result, in 1992 he was released from prison. They had called initially for a retrial because they were adamant that he was guilty, but they hadn't gone down the ethical, correct routes to obtain any sort of evidence. So they called for a retrial, but nothing was ever set, no date was ever set, and nothing came about. So he remained a free man. And Dr. J. Smith died in 2009 of heart disease, again without confessing any involvement to any of the crimes. Another strange note linked to this case that I came across on Reddit is just a little bit interesting, probably has no relation, but someone had commented it, so I thought I might as well share it in relation to the case. So in 1978, the year before the REINERT family murders and disappearance, Dr. J. Smith's own daughter and her husband, so his son-in-law, disappeared themselves. So their names were Stephanie Hunsberger and Edward Hunsberger, and it was actually believed that they kind of ran away to start a life together. There had been a couple of spottings of them in years afterwards, but nothing was ever confirmed. Investigators had no reason to suspect foul play being involved, and nothing strange in the investigation pointed towards anyone else being involved, but it was still kind of a strange addition to the case in relation to Dr. J. Smith, he's had some strange occurrences. And to this day, there have never been any updates on what happened to Karen and Michael, and any updates in the case in relation to Susan's murder. In 1987, the children were declared as legally deceased, even though they had literally, there were no signs. They just vanished, the pair of them. There were no signs whatsoever what could have happened to them, whether they were still alive or not. And sadly, their father died in 2002 without gaining any answers in regards to what happened to any of his family members, his ex-wife nor his children. So that is heartbreaking, and I think it's still considered an open case to this day. So that's everything I'm going to discuss today. I'm sorry if there's a little bit of noise. The cleaners have just turned up and they're hoovering, so I'm going to quickly end this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you guys soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.